When we are sketching the graph of a sinusoidal function, there are 5 critical points in any one cycle of a sine or cosine wave, and they are all equally spaced apart. So I have my 2 sinusoidal functions here. This first one represents a sine function. And the second one here represents a cosine function. And we can talk about all of the critical points as well as the key features for each of these functions. The first thing we can take a look at is the maximum and minimum points. So my maximum point of my sine function, the highest possible point, is up here at 1. So that means this is going to be my maximum value here. Similarly, my minimum value here, the lowest possible value I could get, is here at -1. So those are my maximum and my minimum values, and I usually denote those as dotted lines. There we are. But there's one other dotted line that I'm going to include on here, and that is my midline. So my midline occurs halfway between my max and my min. Well, halfway between 1 and -1 is here at 0. So this is my midline right here. So my maximum is at 1, my minimum is at -1, and my midline is here at 0. Another key feature that we can talk about is the amplitude. And the amplitude is the distance from the midline to the max or the midline to the minimum. It should be the same value since the midline is halfway. So the distance from the midline to the maximum, that is my amplitude, and my amplitude here is 1. Now, what about how the length or how long this one cycle is? Well, from start to finish, I have a length from start to finish. It's 0 to 2 pi. So the period or length of one cycle is 2 pi. Okay, because now we're dealing with radians, where previously you would have seen 360 degrees here, right? This would have been 90, 180, and 270 degrees. Okay. So now we can talk about our 5 critical points. Well, one of my critical points is always going to be the first point in my graph, right where I start. Another one will be where it ends. Another critical point is going to be halfway, so right here in the middle. That's my third critical point. And finally, my last 2 are going to be here at 90, up at my maximum, and down at my minimum. So my sine function's 5 critical points: the start, the max, back to the midline, down to my minimum, and back to my midline. So those are the 5 critical points in a single cycle of a sine function. So we're now going to use that idea to find my 5 critical points and key features of my cosine function. So let's take a look again at my maximum, minimum, and midline. So the maximum, or the highest value I could possibly get, is up here at 1 as well. So there's my maximum. My minimum is down here at -1. There is my minimum. And finally, my midline, which is going to be halfway between my max and my min, is here at 0 again. That is my midline. So it's good habit to get into a practice of this, because these are the features that we're going to need when we've been given, say, an equation and we have to sketch it. We have to figure out the values of all of these things to help us sketch. Okay, so these are all going to be dotted lines there. Now, what about my amplitude? Well, the amplitude is from my midline up to my maximum, and it looks like this amplitude is also 1. The distance from my midline up to my max is 1. What else can we talk about? Let's talk about the length of one cycle, the period. So from start to finish, one complete cycle, the length of this cycle, or the period, is also 2 pi. So we're seeing a lot of similarities between my sine and my cosine function. So far, everything has been the exact same. But when we go to take a look at our 5 critical points, you're going to notice something a little bit different. So for my critical points of my cosine function, my first is going to be right at the beginning of a cycle, but I'm not at my midline anymore. This first critical point is at my maximum. Right? Well, the last critical point will be at the end of the one cycle, also at my maximum. So it's different than my sine function here. My third critical point is halfway, but that puts me down at my minimum. Right? This is very different from my sine function. And finally, halfway between my start and the middle, or my quarter point that I sometimes call it. This would be a quarter point here, and another quarter point there at my midline. So my 5 critical points for my cosine function go to my maximum, midline, minimum, back up to my midline, and up to my maximum. So those are all my critical points there. So very different from a sine function versus a cos function, but all the other key features are the same.